You really think this is a generational buying opportunity?
Well, I think for the right stocks, but because our viewpoint covering tech since late 99 in these downturns, from what we believe are the names that are going to be able to navigate and valuations that we believe are way oversold. So I look at software, cybersecurity, I look at names like Microsoft, you look at names like Amazon, Apple, among others. That's why to us, we're not just going to sit here and say you paint them all with the same brush. It's a bifurcated tape. Fundamentally, when I look at the trends over the next, call it 2-3 years, when I look at the cloud trends, I look at semis, I look at AI, I look at what I believe is the fourth industrial revolution. You stress test these numbers. Look, this is the fundamentally different. The buy side, they're already looking now, 2023 numbers, assume mild recession ahead of the sell side. So my point is that numbers here relative, I mean, if you look at MFANG from an EBITDA perspective, I mean, 12 times, you're starting to look toward what I go almost be market multiples for what I view as probably the best growth names across tech.
Can you make the argument to me today that Apple deserves to be at a 30 PE? Or does it deserve to be closer to the 17 where it was before the Fed put all of the punch in the bowl?
Okay, so that's a good example. Let's just look at Apple.
Yeah.
The services business is a different business today, and I believe going forward, than it was 2 years ago. So you're talking about an $80 billion revenue stream that basically has been a big part of the re-rating in Apple. And it's always been my contention, Apple's a name. When you look at it straight PE, instead of some of the parts in terms of looking at services and hardware, you ultimately, what I believe is, undershoot what should be the core valuation. So my point here is that I'm not saying the froth, the web vans, the global crossings, what we saw in 2000.com front and center. That's not going to happen. I'm just saying you have to separate the have and have nots and valuation here relative to when we go back to 08, 09 and even 01, 02 relative to growth. We view now as the time for the names that we've talked about in our tech playbook to own them.
But is Apple's services business 13 points of valuation better than it was 2 years ago?
And I think when you look at Apple services business, you look at the growth, you look at ultimately the margin on the services piece. I think it's something going into the pandemic, the market was basically assigned, now it's worth $400 billion. And at one point in the pandemic, we're looking at 1.5 trillion. So I think a big difference with some of these names, I'd argue the same with Amazon. Some of the parts, what's the cloud business worth? With Google, I'd argue right here, you're assigning minimal growth and minimal valuation to the cloud. You stress test numbers on the other side of this, get every bear argument out there, but it just comes down to, like, Scott, we've talked to 25 of our checks this week, CIOs, product managers trying to understand spending.
Yeah.
Stress test these areas, it's firm. And that's why we'll cut. Now you'll see numbers get cut because the street will ultimately assume a mild recession.
I fully expect you to show up here and pound the table on Apple and tell me all the reasons why it's great and everybody should buy it. And right now, the market doesn't necessarily care about all those reasons. So why should we?
Look, I mean, we've done checks over the last week, and we were ready to cut numbers if we thought coming out of the supply chain, we saw that zero COVID really having a massive negative impact. Instead, it's the opposite. I actually think right now, tracking slightly ahead. I think from a demand perspective, what we're seeing on services, what we're seeing on iPhones, much better than expectations. And it comes down to streets baking in. You're going to see numbers cut. We think the opposite. That's why I know when we look at Apple here, I view it as a table pounder, risk reward. And I think based on checks, further bullish based on this name.
I mean, you come on, I know you always criticize what you call the haters, right? When people try and come out and talk negatively about the stock, but the stock does seem to have an issue lately that all of those fundamentals are being ignored. Tell me why there's no reason that the stock could go from 137, where it is right now, down to, say, 125. Why couldn't it go there if market sentiment remains as uneven, as unsettled as it currently is?
Look, I'm not saying that we can't go up, but my fundamental issue is the services business. That's the game changer. That's why I believe ultimately we look out 6, 9 months from now, 12, we're going to have a stock with a 2 in front of it. In other words, I believe services is the key change in Apple. And the other thing, the iPhone demand story, you got 25% that have still not upgraded their iPhone in 3.5 years. That's the install base story. And like we said, right now, many yelling fire in a crowded theater. We did checks ready to cut numbers. Instead, it's actually maybe even slightly better.
All right, so let's pivot to Tesla. A new 9-month low for that stock, which talk about getting beaten up lately, it's an obvious understatement. Has your view on Tesla changed in any way? There are some who suggest that this is the last of the so-called meme stocks. If you want to put this in that basket, that are rolling over right now as we speak.
Yeah, well, look, we cut our price target this week from 1,400 to 1,000. Still bullish, in terms of the long-term story in Tesla.
That's a big cut.
But it was a cut because, look, fundamentally, based on our checks in what we're doing in Asia, in terms of China, I think it's going to be a delivery miss. We wanted to impact in terms of what that's going to be in the quarter. Still bullish on the longer-term story in Tesla. But let's just be clear. The Twitter circus show, what we've seen coming out of Musk, combined with what we see, especially in the zero COVID in China, can't wear the rose-colored glasses. We had to cut the price target, and that was really where we came out.
You've said before that Musk accounts for what? Like this drama accounts for like $100? Something like that? Is that right?
I think it's increasing in terms of what that overhang's become because of the worries that if Tesla stock keeps going down, what that can mean in terms of a margin call. Does he have to ultimately put up more stock? That's why this circus show is basically turned into a Category 5 hurricane.
How much of your price target cut was due to concerns you have about China, and then how much legitimately were due to this ongoing soap opera with Musk?
All because of China. When we actually look at the Musk situation, I still think that, a lot of that started to get baked into the name. But as we see today, it starts to cascade. And at the end of the day, it's been a black eye for Musk. And at a time you need him to navigate the storm, you don't want to see him on Twitter just focused on Twitter rather than on Tesla in terms of what we're seeing in the supply chain.
So playing off of both of these stocks, which have huge weightings in, like, say, the NAS 100, for example, there are some who say that one of the worrying signs still in the stock market is that people are still too enamored with tech. These stocks went way up too much. Their valuations increased on Fed liquidity. A lot of that's coming out of the system now. And until investors break the love affair they have with some of the names like this, the market overall can't get real.
Sure, and totally get the argument, but I just think when we look at the transformational growth in tech, that's not stopping in terms of cloud, cybersecurity, obviously names like Palo Alto we saw last night, names that are holding up. I believe the amount of tech spending over the next 4 to 5 years will actually be more than what we've seen over the last 15. So it speaks to my view from a multiple perspective. You don't just throw the towel in on these names because what we're seeing on fundamentals play out, and that's going to be the debate as we saw today front and center.
Before you leave, we have an